This is HeroQuest. It was originally published by Milton Bradley in the UK in 1989, and then a year later in the United States in 1990. The game was a joint effort between Milton Bradley and Games Workshop, notable for their work on the Warhammer series, to make a tabletop game that was accessible to a younger audience. And actually, just looking at it, you can tell that this is kind of like a Dungeons and Dragons primer that borrows rules from a few different tabletop games. It's an excellent way to introduce gamers to a higher complexity adventure game without too much time invested on the front end preparing them or developing characters. Today, I have a 1990 Milton Bradley edition of HeroQuest, and I'd like to compare it to this 2021 Avalon Hill Hasbro edition of HeroQuest. Let's see what's changed and what stayed the same over the course of over 30 years. Let's have a look at the game box, starting with the 1990 edition from Milton Bradley. Now, this is a stunning game box. First off, the footprint is huge. So right away, just from the sheer scale, it's eye-catching, but the art looks like it's straight out of a Dino De Laurentiis flick. I mean, the barbarian looks like he could be Conan. I mean, it's great, and I love all of the dynamic action depicted. This sells me on the game right out of the gate. When we flip it over, we have your standard fare for board games, a couple kids sitting around enjoying it with a closer image of the board itself so you can see what you're in for, as well as some close-ups of the game components themselves and a brief description of what's inside. Now, this is a lift-off top box, and one thing that I really like is no space is wasted. You have a lot of information printed on the underside of the lid, as well as the insert that serves as the shop. So we're not going to get too far into the rules on this game, but these are all necessary for the gameplay. There's also an organizer where you can keep your furniture on one side and the figurines can fit underneath the cardboard insert for the shop. So all in all, the first time I tried putting this away, the copy I had been divided up into some small plastic bags, and I discovered that the more you try to put these parts into small plastic bags, the more dangerous it is because they're going to catch on each other. They're kind of forced to rub on each other like a rock tumbler. And the other thing is once you have all these components in smaller bags, it's hard to get them to flatten out. So I discovered that just sorting the parts loosely inside the box allowed them some space so that they weren't going to crush against each other, while at the same time, it wasn't like they were going to tumble around and get smashed as easily as in a bag. Surprisingly, I thought the bag would protect them, but it did not. So I was a little nervous about the Lego sound. But honestly, I feel better about, I'm not like shaking this box around, and I feel better about the pieces being able to move than being stuck and crunched. So that being said, there are some delicate pieces in here that I wish we had a better storage solution for, but you know, it's still ample room for the game and a serviceable game box. Now, let's have a look at the 2021 Hasbro and Avalon Hill edition of HeroQuest. Right away, we can see that there is a change to the art. It looks less vivid and more cartoony, though the colors are brighter and more saturated, and I'm not going to complain. This looks very inviting. I like that the design is an homage to the original box. When we flip it over, we no longer see kids enjoying the game. Now we have a close-up of the game board and its components, as well as a little bit more of a thorough explanation of what the game is. Clearly, this is being marketed to an older crowd. The original idea behind HeroQuest was to develop a tabletop game that was accessible to a younger audience, and that has not changed. But I believe the fact that we are now marketing towards adults who grew up with the original HeroQuest, they're trying to make a more premium looking game that appeals to that audience, and boy did they succeed. Everything about this game box screams quality. When I went to open it up, it is a lift-off top box. The tolerances are a bit tight, so a little bit of finesse is needed. But inside were two tray organizers with graphic sleeves to hold all of the figurines and parts safely. This is huge. Now, the box is a little bit deeper than the 1990 edition to accommodate those trays. And the board now folds into quarters to help reduce the overall width or footprint of the box. So as you can see, the older version is a shallower box with a wider footprint. This one is a bit deeper, with a narrower footprint, more it's more friendly for shelf space, more efficient, I guess. Tripping over my words there. Fun. But anyway, when we get back into the storage, I absolutely love these plastic trays inside. They're vacuform trays that each individual figurine can seat inside with a protective clear cover, and then, like I said, a cardboard graphic sleeve that fits over it. In fact, there's cardboard corrugate on the underside of the vacuum form tray to help give stability to it. And these are not chintzy trays either. They actually are quite sturdy. So I love this because when I'm playing the game, I have to kind of set up and arrange all the creatures. If I'm playing as Zargon, make sure that I have everything organized so it's easy to just pick up and assemble the dungeon. With this, you just set the two trays next to you. Everything's organized. It's gorgeous. It holds all the player cards. It holds all the score pads or the player pads that keep track of their health and other attributes. Just wonderful. So I gotta say, Avalon Hill and Hasbro knocking it out of the park. If I'm comparing the boxes head and head, I gotta say Avalon Hill and Hasbro wins. I mean, I would say this is a 10 out of 10. This is maybe a 7 out of 10. This is ample room to store everything, but honestly, they could have done better given how fragile the figurines can be, and the fact that even with that space under the cardboard insert, when you're putting things away, you have to kind of work everything flat. That's why having everything bagged individually was a little rough. And even putting things like all the figurines into one bag together, like I said, it just forced them in on each other. It was best to leave them loose. So as long as you're handling this game gently, that's not going to damage anything. However, when you have these individual trays, this is so easy to store, tip, transport. You have no fear of damaging these figurines. So wonderful game box, wonderful game box. 11 out of 10 for this. Wonderful presentation. It just feels rich and luxurious, colorful, and well appointed. Let's have a look at the game itself, starting with the 1990 Milton Bradley edition. Now, right away, this looks like there's a lot going on. For display purposes, I set up the entire scenario for the first quest called The Trial. Now, this game system comes with 14 individual quests that progressively get more difficult, and actually players can bring their character from one quest to the other to have a full campaign. And with that progressive scoring also includes the ability to buy weapons and supplies between quests, which is why we have that insert that was shown earlier in this game box. So that serves as basically information on what type of items a player can purchase for their character between quests with the gold that they procure during the quests. Now, one player will take the role of the evil wizard Zargon, and they will get this little blinder that includes some gameplay information behind it. They'll set this up so the other players cannot see what's in the quest book. Now, this is provided with 14 pre-made quests and a story intro. So Zargon basically runs the game similar to how a dungeon master would run a Dungeons and Dragons campaign. Only this one is significantly less story-driven. There is plenty of story, but everything's pre-made, and it's not as substantial as something as in-depth as Dungeons and Dragons. Now, you can build on this as much as you want, and in fact, the quest book includes blank map information so players can develop their own quests. So what's nice is the game is set up to appeal to about like a 12-year-old, like a 10, 12-year-old, while at the same time giving you the freedom to build on that. So you can really go hard with HeroQuest if you want. And this contains 14 pre-made quests, but Milton Bradley also produced a number of expansion packs. Maybe we'll take a look at some of those later, but the expansion packs include a whole host of other pre-made storylines, entire campaigns per expansion pack, some including figurines. In fact, they also had made a book that had stickers and maps to help you better create your own quests. that was really neat that the game allowed for so much creativity at the time as well. Now, the actual combat is reminiscent to Games Workshop's other works, Warhammer, but essentially players will have these 2 movement die, and that'll determine where they can move their character, and then they have these combat die for if they're going to be fighting another character. The combat die have a skull, a shield, and a creature shield for throwing attacks or throwing saving rolls. Now, how the game works is most of these items will actually not be on the board when the players start. Generally, they'll just start in a room with this little staircase and a couple doorways, or a doorway, depending on what the scenario calls for. As players progress around the map, Zargon will reveal the map. So what's neat is they'll come up and see a door is here, and if they say open the door, then Zargon will assemble the creatures and items that are in that room. Players can then fight with the creatures in the room, search the room for treasure, search for secret entryways or traps, and move on through. So each scenario will have different winning and losing parameters. Like there's one where you need to rescue a knight who's been captured and interrogated. This one, the original, that's called The Trial, you're defeating a gargoyle. Most of these dungeons begin and end with the stairway. You leave the stairway room, you accomplish your goal, and then the goal is to make it back to the stairway to conclude the quest. So if a player has to flee to keep their character alive, Zargon wins. So you can actually play part of the quest, leave, and then have to go try it again. It's kind of neat that way. It's forgiving enough that players can start, and I've only run into a scenario once or twice playing through this that anybody really wanted to try to flee to save their character, because the other nice thing is, since the characters are pre-made, it's not until you're really late in the campaign that you would be that concerned about saving one. There's not a huge level progression system or anything. Most of that's handled by spending gold that you procure in the game on items that will help your character be able to attack differently, or items that will add to your defense. Now, the other neat thing is this game includes some cards that are used for the gameplay. So in this one, there's chaos magic spells. That's what Zargon can use in certain scenarios, or basically some of Zargon's creatures can use against the players. There are artifact cards for artifacts that players might find throughout the game, treasure cards for treasure, creature cards that explain what creatures lurk in the darkness, so players are prepared to fight with those creatures. There's also character cards that explain the base stats for the characters. There is a player pad as well that accompanies those character cards. That player pad players will hold on to throughout all the quests and use it to keep track of their character's health, items, and other pertinent notes for the game. So again, be it that it's progressive and it can go from quest to quest all the way through the full campaign, is really nice. I dig it. I think it's awesome. So you can actually develop a character even though that development is relatively limited. There are also cards for spells. You have a wizard and an elf. So there are 4 elemental spells. You're going to have fire, earth, air, and water, and those are divvied up between those 2 characters. The wizard, of course, getting the lion's share of those spell cards to be used throughout the game. Those they can spend throughout each quest and then will recharge when they go to the next quest. So that limitation keeps the wizard from being overpowered, and they need to be very strategic with their moves. That being said, it sounds complicated, but it doesn't take long to figure out, and a lot of care went into making sure that this would appeal to younger kids and be a nice entry point to strategic and role-playing tabletop games. This is an absolute blast. Honestly, I did not grow up with HeroQuest. I was aware of the game, but I had not had any opportunity to play until relatively recently when I decided to do this review, and I gotta say, this is a blast. I love playing as Zargon, which that's something I thought would not be fun. I always thought one player would be kind of annoyed by being stuck running the game. And actually, I found whether I was playing against one other player or multiples, it was fun playing as Zargon because I had the opportunity to just go nuts on everybody. I mean, sometimes you don't always want to tear into your friends when you're playing competitive games. Sometimes you take it easy at first and then go, and it's all in good fun. When you're the clear antagonist, there's something fun about getting to be evil. So that was something that I enjoyed. I also found that Mrs. Old Crappy Couch, who doesn't normally get into these huge role-playing games that are too deep, absolutely bit into this. So it was really fun having getting a chance to introduce somebody to a game that they absolutely adored after playing. So this is one that's going to have a permanent place on my game shelf. I'm always excited to play HeroQuest, and again, just kudos all of the care that Milton Bradley and Games Workshop went to make beautiful figurines, wonderful set pieces. This colorful board is so nice. Now, these set pieces, these little bits of furniture, are assembled from plastic and cardboard. So the cardboard punches out, folds into place, and sticks in the plastic. So you get these nice bookshelves or fireplaces and tables. They look very nice. The characters are highly detailed, albeit that it was limited to that era. So what we're used to seeing now in production of these figurines is different than what we were seeing in the late 80s, early 90s. However, that being said, these are still great. These would be excellent to paint. In fact, their level of simplicity is great for a novice painter to hop right in. I have a buddy who's really into tabletop games that's been encouraging me to go after painting these, and I think I might, because I've seen some of these premium HeroQuest sets before with painted figurines, and if you think these sculpts look amazing now, when you even just detail wash them, they're so nice. Now, some of the items like the door frames, which this is just a cardboard insert that goes into this plastic base, it's functional, but in storage, these have gotten beaten up. So, and the bases are really chunky and heavy. So for instance, these doors go between two squares that player pieces can move between. And if you have a player piece butted right up against one of those doors, they don't quite sit on their square, which that's kind of a legacy issue when we look at this other one, though they did minimize that. They found a nice way to handle that. But overall, the details are awesome. I love the little rats on the bookcases and the art on the printed pieces. The figurines are produced of some sort of PVC, so the issue that I am noticing is there is some plastic fatigue on some of them. You can particularly notice on the finer pieces like the sword that the barbarian and the sword that the elf have. I've also noticed on some of the set pieces, it's a little bit more brittle. It doesn't last very well, and packing this game away, when I received this, I purchased this secondhand. All the pieces were in bags and then in the box, but the problem is the amount of pieces in the bags made the bags kind of too thick to fit in here, so they were crunched down a bit. I noticed that once you've got this, there's a little organizer where you can put all the furniture onto one side of the board, and most of the figurines will fit underneath the cardboard insert that works as the shop. And as long as this box is gently handled, these figurines are not going to smack into each other enough to really do a lot of damage. If I were to paint them, I would definitely be getting a better storage solution, but for the time, this was more than adequate, and the pieces are sturdy enough. Again, they're small, finer pieces like those swords, but that's really about it. Almost all the other characters are really thick and chunky. Now, I want to point out, since Games Workshop worked on this one, Zargon wields the power of chaos magic, and you will notice there are some characters called Chaos Warriors, and there's also the Femur, and these are characters that are actually prevalent in Games Workshop's other work, which is Warhammer. So when we move on to the new series, that's a difference that you're going to see when we move over to the 2021 edition from Avalon Hill. But before we're done, I want to point out that all of the game type cards in this were really nicely printed and came on a nice thick cardstock, so they were nice and snappy. The cardboard pieces that served as punch outs, like for instance, there are these little tokens here that serve to both signify where solid walls are, or like this one on the reverse side, it's a damage token. So for creatures with multiple damage points, you use these to track them. Others will have things like secret passageways or traps printed on them, but these little cardboard components were very high quality, very thick, and as you can see, you know, we're 30 years on and this stuff has held up beautifully. So the original HeroQuest from Milton Bradley was surprisingly well made, and I found that One of the biggest issues in tracking down a copy was mostly from missing components, not necessarily broken components. Another thing I want to touch on is I really love the dice. I like wooden dice, and these little wooden dice have all rounded corners. I love the red movement dice have gold paint in the pips, which I love it. It just looks rich. It looks neat. The combat dice, it's so dramatic when they have rounded corners when you're rolling them, and because they're small, they fit in your hand quite nicely. So I like the wooden dice. Now, let's have a look at the game and components for the 2021 Avalon Hill edition from Hasbro. Now, I'm going to go to the dice here real quick since that was what most recently I was looking at. I want to point out they did a really good job with these, even though they're a little bit bigger. Like they're not bigger in regards to what other dice are. In fact, these are smaller. These are kind of diminutive here, but for some reason I just like them. But these, all of the logos, the skulls, the shields, these are painted on, and there's a little bit of recess on here, but very minimal stamping. These have a hardy stamp and nice sharp corners, big chunky weighty dice. These work beautifully. However, they don't go all over the table. And the thing is, that's a good thing. Like I like the drama of throwing these, but as you can see, they roll quite a bit more when I'm throwing these little rounded wood dice, as opposed to these big chunky guys here. You'll notice the chunky guys just land on their side quite nicely and don't scatter too much. I mean, it's the smoothness of the board here, but the art on them is really nice and bold and still looks very much like the original art on the dice. The movement dice are just regular white pips on red plastic as opposed to the gold pips. So not a huge difference. I mean, functionally, they're both perfect for what they do. It's just a style preference. When we get into the real cool stuff, you can obviously see that the board is larger, and not only is it larger, but it's extremely well detailed. That's not to say that the board in the 1990 edition is not highly detailed, but when you compare the two, you can see that the board in the 1990 edition has a bit more of a cartoony aesthetic, which I think is funny because that falls more in line with the cover art of the Avalon Hill one, where this looks a little bit more cartoony than the 1990 edition. However, the game board is definitely a little bit more rounded, a little bit more bright and cell shady looking, whereas we get into this one, and though there are bright colors to denote the rooms and solid lines, and they follow that color of the initial one, that color theme, what we have is infinitely more detail on the cracks. The print quality is excellent, but you see all the cracks and greebling around here, all the detail, the bones, the stones, all of the stress lines and breaks. It's just lovely. So they did a really good job recreating this board. You'll also notice the HeroQuest logo has been relocated from the bottom of the board to the side. Realistically, when you're looking at the quest book, you're just going to have to look at the room shapes to orient yourself, because they do advise like what side Zargon should sit on, but it doesn't really matter too much as long as you can keep up with the orientation of the board. The environmental pieces, the player pieces and the environmental pieces, the sculpts are amazing. The detail that they put into this is so awesome. I mean, this is, like I said before, the 1990 edition is rife for somebody who wants to cut their teeth on painting figurines. I would actually, I'm not much for painting figurines. I'm just kind of getting into the sport here. I would be very intimidated if this was my first way out, because these are so highly detailed. I wouldn't want to screw them up, but these are excellent. I would love to get some detail work done on these figurines. They're gorgeous. And Avalon Hill and Hasbro knew that people would want to add some detail. In fact, I don't have them on display here, but in the trays, there are also some environmentals, little skulls, little rats that players can paint and add to these pieces here. I just haven't done anything to embellish the environment in the game. But I mean, heck, the sarcophagus in this one actually has a removable lid, so you could fill it with little skulls if you wanted to. Everything's also got a great weight Look, this is the fireplace. You compare this to the cardboard. So we have the cardboard fireplace in 1990, and you compare it to this beautifully sculpted piece from the 2021 edition, and it weighs. So it just has a lovely feel to it. It just adds to the richness of the game. This iteration of HeroQuest is an absolute love letter to HeroQuest fans everywhere. I am not gonna lie, it's hard to put into words how satisfied I was with this product from the moment that I opened it up. Now, before we get too far into that, there are some other fundamental differences between this and the 1990, but very few. And most of those seem to have to do with licensing. So we no longer have Chaos Magic, we have Dread Magic. Zargon uses Dread Magic, and we've got our updated art here. The blinder is very similar in scale and what information it has on the back. It's just updated with the new art, which is it hits hard, dude. This goes hard. I like Zargon and the new gargoyle. Oh, it's awesome. I mean, just everything is the detail they put into this. I just love it. But these, so we don't have Chaos Magic, we have Dread Magic. We don't have Chaos Warriors, we now have Dread Warriors. We don't have Femur, we now have Abominations. But the Abominations rock. The Abominations look like something out of the Black Lagoon, and I love it. All of the sculpts are so amazingly detailed. I mean, just playing this is an absolute joy because of the set pieces. Now, I had mentioned the door frames before, these cardboard door frames. Durability, I wasn't so hot on. You get plastic frames in this one. Now, the bases are lighter weight, though they're still about equal width. But how they counteracted that was that the scale of the board being increased just a little bit makes all the difference in the world. It can still interrupt how a player sits, but because you don't have this chunky wedge of a base and instead it's a little bit more flat, you can kind of cheat a figurine onto it a bit more. So, I mean, you can't ask for much more than that. They really, it would be unreasonable to complain about it crowding a player space at this point. This is the most mitigation that you could ask for, and it's gorgeously sculpted mitigation too. But you get all of the same, otherwise you get all the same creature pieces, the same quantities of all the various creatures. You get the same heroes. You have the barbarian, the elf, the wizard, and the dwarf, all with brand new hyper detailed sculpts that are just gorgeous. Now, the material that they used, I'm not a plastics expert. I've embarrassed myself referring to vacuformed as blow molded, etc. This plastic is significantly more flexible, and so it's much less likely to snap or break easily, which is something that I really admire. So compared to the original, you also have that quality jump where the material just feels like it will be able to handle itself well in the box, even though they give you the trays, these beautiful trays to put all the figurines in. So, I mean, and having those trays on hand makes setting up this game 10 times easier. Now, when you compare the rule books, let's get into this guy here. When we compare the rule books, they're actually, as far as content, identical, but it's all updated art, all updated printing. So the Avalon Hill edition, let's start with the 1990. The 1990 Milton Bradley edition is saddle stitched, unsealed bond paper, about 8.5 by 11 folded size. It's very beautifully printed in this nice sort of yellowish brown kind of gold color, but it is basically just a 2-color print. But it's very thorough, and actually this is very well written out. It seemed daunting to me when the very first thing I looked at is it said it's advised that whoever starts this game reads the entire rulebook from start to finish. And, you know, it's 23 pages, so it's not that bad. But at first you're kind of like, man, that's going to be a lot. But it's really quite easy. And you need somebody to have a full understanding of the game, because explaining it to a player is much easier than going through the whole rule book. I mean, anytime you're laying out rules in print, you have to be very thorough, whereas when you're playing with somebody and you're doing a teach, generally it's easier to get somebody to pick up the rules in practice. Now, moving on to the 2021 Avalon Hill book, we can see that the art is very reminiscent, but now we have this beautiful full color sealed paper. Now, both of these are saddle stitch. This is a staple saddle stitch. This one is actually done with like a linen thread, which I really like. I've seen that on a few other game manuals, and that's just excellent for the longevity of the manual, but also the fit and finish. And you don't get those weird kind of puckers that happen over time with staples as the spine starts to bend or anything like that. Everything about this manual, I mean, look at the color print, just gorgeous. And like I said, none of the rules have changed. They've changed, you know, Chaos Magic to Dread Magic, and they've changed the Chaos Warriors and the Femur. So obviously that's more parting with the Games Workshop licenses to maintain the independence of HeroQuest. And I'm not really bothered by it. It doesn't affect the game whatsoever. And in fact, again, they pulled out all the stops with the Abomination. That's such a cool sculpt. Also, necessary thing is the quest books, which I want to point out, similar to the rule books. The quest book is also largely the same, though now in a beautiful full color print, sealed glossy paper. So very, very excellent quality. If we're going to compare these and get into whether it's worth tracking down a vintage copy from the late 80s or early 90s, or to go out and get a 2021 edition from Avalon Hill, I am wholeheartedly going to advise you get the modern edition. I've gotten so used to modern games in many ways being a lateral move in quality or a downgrade, and very few times have I seen modern games really be an upgrade. But this is like a quantum leap forward in quality, in fit and finish. This is one of the most premium products that I have ever purchased. I bought this myself. I haven't been sent any of these. When I do these reviews, I am procuring these games on my own so you can get the most neutral opinion. And I really enjoy this HeroQuest game system. It's quickly become one of my favorites just because it's so easy to get people who aren't used to this type of game up to speed and playing and having the time of their lives. And anything that's easy to teach that expands somebody's gaming horizon is always a winner for me. Like I said, I'm really glad to get to see these side by side, and if you have a real nostalgic draw to the original HeroQuest, by all means, go out and get it. What's funny is it's, again, like I said, the rule book has not changed. You have some creature names that have changed and some magic effects that have changed in name, but everything else will your experience will translate between these two beautifully. But I cannot tell you why you would want to go get the vintage one over the Avalon Hill version. Every bit of this game is an upgrade. The creature trays, the trays to hold all the figurines to make them easily accessible and keep them sorted, that's worth the price of admission as is. The expanded board is excellent, and the amazing sculpts, the materials that seem much more resilient, the cards with that lovely linen feel, everything about these nice chunky dice, everything about this is an upgrade. And considering that if you're hunting down one of these older ones, the pricing between the two is going to be surprisingly comparable, I gotta say, the Avalon Hill Hasbro edition of HeroQuest, this pleases the couch. Go out, get yourself a copy. You won't be disappointed. So I gotta ask everybody who's watching here, what do you think of HeroQuest? Have you played it? Do you love it? What do you think of the expansions? Which ones do you think I should check out? Because this is something that I think I could sink a lot of time into, and I'm very excited to bite into it. So comment below, let me know. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.